Okay, everyone who is joining us, thank you very much for taking the time and logging in. I am Kristen Perez-Rickles. I am the behavior specialist that works on the federal grant that implements OTISS, the Oklahoma Tiered Intervention System of Support through Oklahoma.
I'm Jessica Oakes. I am the instructional specialist on the same grant alongside Kristen.
We asked about the chat box because we wanted to make sure that if you have questions as we're going through this really quick overview of OTISS, just feel free to put them in the chat. We will either talk about them as we're going through, or depending on what the question is, we may save it for the end. Okay, so just very briefly, I mentioned that our work is done through a grant. It is the State Personnel Development Grant. This is the third iteration that Oklahoma has received. It is through Oklahoma that we developed, it is through the SPDIG that we developed OTISS, and any materials, tools, information that is generated through the grant is posted on our website, and we'll give you a link to that at the end also.
So our objectives today are that when we finish, we hope that you understand the intent of OTISS and how it can apply in your current setting, and just develop a basic knowledge of our 8 core components through OTISS, and learn about resources available for implementation.
We have a very brief video. We have been warned that you probably won't be able to hear the sound very well. If you are looking for it later, though, you can search on YouTube for OTISS introduction, and it'll probably be like the second page that you'll find it. But this is just something we've developed to very briefly explain what we do.
Say hello to OTISS. OTISS is the Oklahoma Tiered Intervention System of Support, Oklahoma's version of a multi-tiered system of support, with the goal of ensuring high levels of success for all students. OTISS does this by helping teachers, parents, and administrators identify students' academic and behavioral strengths and weaknesses. This support helps educators select research-based interventions targeted to student-specific needs, setting them on the road to success. But don't call OTISS just another program or curriculum. Rather, OTISS is a framework used to organize all aspects of instruction into a cohesive system that provides students with increasing levels of support. OTISS has 8 core components: leadership, collaborative teaming, family engagement, professional development, universal screening, tiered levels of intervention, progress monitoring, and database decision-making. When these components of OTISS work together, students' progress is constantly monitored and their needs addressed. When students struggle, educators can intervene early to ensure that all students succeed. OTISS is designed to work with all students, regardless of their learning level. By responding quickly and early to learning or behavioral difficulties, OTISS can help every student stay on the road to success.
So as you can see, OTISS is Oklahoma's tiered intervention model for identifying and addressing academic and behavioral difficulties that interfere with student success. OTISS is Oklahoma's branded model of MTSS, if you are familiar with that. It's colloquially known as RTI, or PBIS also fit within that. So OTISS is a systematic approach to instruction that we attempt to respond to and prevent those school-based problems. We accomplish this by identifying students and making those efforts to improve their performance, and then examining our instructional efforts to make sure that they're effective and working, and if not, changing as needed. So OTISS is a framework. It's not a program, it's not an initiative, it's not a curriculum, it's not one more thing to do. It is the framework for organizing good instructional practices and resources. It is built to work within your existing resources, go ahead.
One thing that we do recommend all of our sites do at the very beginning of this work is list every resource, every curriculum, every intervention available to you, and then organize them into levels of intensity and levels of support.
So OTISS is made up of 8 core components. As you can see, leadership, teaming, family engagement, professional development, universal screening, tiered levels of intervention, progress monitoring, and database decision making. We like to break these into two different pieces, the people and the processes. The first one we're going to talk about is the leadership, and that's key. It's crucial for ensuring the successful implementation of OTISS. It sets a climate for your school, and it's responsible for allocating staff, time, professional development, and resources as needed. You may not be an administrator, but you can be a teacher leader that implements this in your classroom and experiences that success. Teaming is a big part of OTISS. It's a collaborative process where you come together with different personalities to commit to a group effort or a goal. The collaborative teaming understands that all students are their students. In an alternative setting, this might mean that collaborating with other educators in your setting, general educators, or other service providers in your area. One of the ways teachers improve is by learning from each other. We don't want it to be a new team. If you already have an existing team that's already formed that supports students, that could be your OTISS team, or a PLC team as an option. So the OTISS team works collaboratively to determine student strengths and needs, review their response to interventions, and interpret and utilize data to develop a plan designed to address students' academic and/or behavioral needs. Family engagement. Families are very important to this process. They are definitely stakeholders in their students' educational success. The family buy-in provides that consistency. Parents and families want to know better in order to do better. It's best practice with OTISS to notify parents when their child moves tiers. And we also encourage our schools or sites or programs to have a parent on their OTISS team. When families are engaged, we know students, they acquire skills faster. They earn higher grades and test scores. They enroll in higher level programs. They're promoted more and earn more credits. They adapt better to school and attend more regularly. They have better social skills and behavior, and they graduate and go on to higher education.
When I was working in special education, I noticed that oftentimes the families who were the least engaged were the ones that I thought should be the most engaged. And so we understand that this is a easier said than done kind of task, but even just involving parents in the very beginning, as much as possible, sending home notes or giving calls and letting them know where their child is academically and behaviorally. And eventually, hopefully, after you've involved them often enough, they'll begin to ask some of those more pertinent questions. Oh, also, we did want to mention that in Oklahoma's ESSA plan, the EDGE plan, it was noted that alternative schools may have greater weight placed on their graduation rate and on the chronic absenteeism for accountability. And as you can see, MTSS and OTISS systems have been shown to improve school attendance and graduation rates. So this is one system and one thing you can implement in order to improve some of those areas.
The impact of leadership, teaming, and family engagement is essential. And again, if you're just a teacher and not just a teacher, because you're amazing, if you're a teacher and not an administrator, and you can embed some of these things in your classroom, you know that that's going to shift your culture in your classroom. It also changes relationships with students when there's a team effort moving students towards success. And if you are an administrator, this definitely can change the culture within your entire building. Our next component is professional development. You want to establish an ongoing learning community in which everyone knows that ongoing learning leads to success for all. A good example to do this is using PLCs to share those successes with interventions that's happening in your classroom with your kids. Also, with professional development, start with identifying areas of greatest need to develop a professional development plan. Professional development really requires that follow-up for things to be truly implemented and to reach student success. So coaching, additional training if needed, like a book study where you're following up on something that you've learned. And you definitely want to track that impact of the professional development on student learning.
One thing to remember is, as a teacher, you may not feel like you have a whole lot of control over your professional development, but I know Jennifer does a great job of listening to y'all's feedback and what you think you need. So just as you're going through your school year or your practice and you've identified something that you would like to learn that would benefit your students, make note of it and figure out where you could access it, either through Jennifer, your principal, whatever it may be. And it doesn't necessarily have to fall within what you think of as your area of focus. Again, as a special education teacher, I worked primarily with students with autism, and I didn't think of literacy as my area of focus, but having additional professional development in that area would have benefited my practices, which would have benefited my students.
If you are an administrator, we encourage you to regularly check in with your teachers to best support them in their with their professional learning.
Sorry, our chat made it not go. And go. Okay. So after you've got kind of the people in place and everyone understands kind of the need and the desire, we go into the processes. And the processes for a multi-tiered system are the same in an alternative education program as they are in a traditional setting, with a few slight adjustments that we'll talk about. And those processes include screening, intervention and instruction, and progress monitoring. One thing to note is that these processes are the same throughout different multi-tiered systems, throughout response to intervention, and they are also kind of the background and the groundwork for your RSA. So universal screening is exactly that. You screen all students within your program, within your class, using a common assessment to determine those with the potential to be at risk. In alternative settings, we understand that every student may be identified as at risk, and so what you would do in that case is kind of vary the need of at risk to meet each student's needs specifically. So it should be done for academic subjects. Like we mentioned, it is required for RSA, but we also recommend that it's done for behaviors, and this can be done through universal data collection, whether it's office discipline referrals, in-classroom data collection, or checklists of social emotional skills and prerequisite skills for appropriate behavior. So tiered interventions are typically three different tiers. There's tier 1, that's your core instruction. These are the supports that are available to every student. And then tier 2, those are the supports that are necessary for the few students who don't make progress within your core. And then tier 3 is what's reserved for those with the most significant or intensive needs. We understand that the resources for tier 3 are a little bit more sparse, and so we want to make sure that we provide them only to those who need them the absolute most. In alternative settings, your core instruction is likely already more intensive than in a traditional setting. So your tier 1 is already some type of intervention that's more intensive than at a traditional setting, and so you would increase the layers of intensity as you move up that triangle. So tiered interventions are not just more time and support. They can be more time and support, but it should be noted that it should also be another way to teach the material. It should also be matched specifically to skill deficits and less conceptual. There is a difference between differentiation and intervention. Differentiation will happen at your core 1, where you use materials at the level of all of different groups of students to meet their needs to teach something conceptually. Intervention is targeting their specific skill deficits to make differentiation less necessary later on and to improve those skill gaps. So if it is a true intervention, it must be evidence-based. Oklahoma has adopted the definition of evidence-based from the federal ESSA. And so what we mean by evidence-based is anything that has a statistically significant effect on improving student outcomes, and that's demonstrated through previous well-designed studies. And those studies should be comparable to the population and the resources available in your building. Okay. So OTISS interventions are implemented for students who are having academic or behavioral challenges. There are several different interventions specific to behavioral challenges. Interventions are also strategies proven to work to remediate and prevent future challenges. That's what makes them evidence-based. They've been proven. And then they're provided at different levels based on the student's needs. So it's a varying level of intensity and level of support. And then they can be intensified or reduced based on the student's response. Once a student has been identified as needing a more intensive intervention, they don't always receive that level of intensity. It's always based on student response and student need. So Tier 1, as we mentioned, that is your core instruction for all students. It's standards aligned, academic and behavior instruction. It's where differentiation will occur. And again, it may already be more intensive than in traditional settings in your current setting, but it can and should include social emotional learning and behavioral lessons, and we'll talk a little bit more about what those can look like.
So academically, as we all know as educators, fair doesn't mean everyone gets the same thing. It really means that everyone's getting what they need to be successful. And that instruction and how students report their learning will be differentiated. We have the example of if you're teaching a comprehension lesson and you're connecting it with a written response, and that's a barrier, remove that barrier and use different options for the response. And just make sure that students are really grasping the content.
So behaviorally, that core instruction should look very consistent within your classroom. So what that means is that if you can have the same 3 to 5 expectations for all students in common areas, so everyone behaves the same way in the cafeteria, everyone knows how to behave within the hallway, and if those are consistent across teachers and across staff in your building, we ensure that everyone is treated equitably in terms of how we're expecting them to behave. Within your classroom, those expectations should also be about 3 to 5 for your whole classroom or for specific areas in the classroom, and they should be clear and consistent. Have them posted if possible. Go over them at the beginning of the school year, at the beginning after long breaks, and review them as needed. And then make sure that you teach them everything all the way down to how they can get another pencil, teaching them how you want them to behave or how you want them to access certain materials will limit some of those behavioral difficulties you'll see if they come up with their own expectations or routines. So for Tier 2, again, this is strategic instruction for some students. Your Tier 1, your core instruction, is designed to meet the needs of the majority. But again, every student has varying needs, and so even with a very strong core instruction, there will be some students who need more support. And so this will take the form of additional academic or behavioral interventions. This is in addition to what they get in their core. It's not a replacement. So specialists can and should act as a resource and assist in this area. If you have access to any related service providers who work with your students, loop them in at this level also and make sure that you are all working together to implement those really strong interventions. And then at this level, we also recommend twice monthly progress monitoring. This ensures that you don't work through an intervention for so long and then find out that it hasn't worked and you have to make up that time. And then it gives them enough time to improve once an intervention has been put in place also. So when choosing your intervention for Tier 2, like we said with at the very beginning, it's less conceptual when you begin working through an intervention, and it's more matched to specific skill deficits. For instance, in reading, instead of it being matched to just generic reading skills, it would be decoding or comprehension or something more specific and targeted. In the area of behavior, it would be less about demonstrating kindness and self-management, and it would be specific about not hitting and what that replacement would look like. So increasing social communication instead of aggressing. So another last note about intervention selection, make sure that whatever intervention you choose, you have a sufficient amount of resources. You have enough time, you have enough materials, you have enough people for that intervention to be implemented consistently. If you get halfway through implementing an intervention and it's working, but you've run out of time or you've run out of materials, it is no longer going to benefit the student. So just make sure that that's a consideration as well. So then Tier 3, this is reserved for a few students, the absolute most in need students. So this is for academic and behavioral students, and it's students who have received Tier 2 but are still below benchmark or still not improving after receiving Tier 2 services. This is, again, something in addition to their Tier 1 supports and their Tier 2 supports. So this can look like supplemental instructional materials, smaller, more intensive, more flexible groups. It ideally could be specialist-led. I know that's not always a possibility. And then this one, we recommend minimum of weekly progress monitoring. You want to make sure that these really finite resources and intensive resources you're using at this level are being effective so that you don't waste any of those finite resources. We've talked a lot about interventions and intervention selection, and we wanted to make sure that we gave you all some resources for where you can find evidence-based interventions. Interventioncentral.org is one. There's intensiveintervention.org, and then EBI Missouri. And we'll just show you really quickly. This is Intervention Central. At the very top, they separate it between academic interventions and behavior interventions, and then they limit it even further based on specific skills. So for behavioral interventions, for instance, they have some specific to self-management, some specific to increasing communication. And then the National Center on Intensive Intervention, under intervention resources, you can find some sample lesson plans as well. And then EBI, that's the Evidence-Based Intervention Network. They're from the University of Missouri, and they have reading interventions, math interventions, and behavior interventions. And then they'll also provide you with some evidence-based assessments if you need them. So after you have screened and identified students and you've implemented your interventions, you want to progress monitor. And that's data collection at regular intervals, and it's to identify if a student is acquiring the skills and closing those achievement gaps that you have identified. So tracking a student's response over time to interventions is a way for you to determine if they're effective, if they're not effective, what you can do to improve on them, and then making decisions about ongoing intervention implementation for that specific student. So the monitoring process is typically done by an intervention team. Again, if you don't have a full team, it can be you and one other person, maybe not necessarily in your program, but someone you need to bounce ideas off of. Make sure that you adhere to FERPA, though. So within that process, you determine your areas to monitor, and that's what occurs when you identify a student during screening. You set targets and goals for the student performance, and then you decide on the interventions to use. Once that's happened, you decide on the frequency of collecting the monitoring data. If it is an intervention that is teaching a skill that will take at least 1 month to learn, You don't want to progress monitor before they've had enough time to learn those skills, so that's something to be mindful of. And then you use your data to determine if they've met their goal, if they've progressed toward their goal adequately, or if they need a different intervention. So data-based decision-making, this is our last core component, but it is what occurs throughout all of the processes. Using your data to make decisions ensures that every decision is intentional, it's based on observable facts, and ensures that no child falls through the cracks. One thing that I think we can all agree on is that teaching is a work of heart. I love that saying. But we have to make sure that the decisions we're making are based less on how we feel and more on how the student is behaving and how they're able to perform. So the data necessary to make decisions, where students should be performing, oftentimes this is done or determined from normative or screening cut points. In programs where every student does not meet kind of that normative goal, you would make your cut points based on need. And then where students are performing before intervention, that's your baseline. So you can ensure that where they're performing on the intervention or after the intervention is growth, and that they've made growth and that the intervention has been successful. I don't know if that makes sense. So decision making within the tiers. You use all of your data at the beginning to determine which interventions are necessary, when to progress monitor, but once you have provided a student with tiered support, with different levels of support, and you progress monitor, you use that information to decide if they are making enough progress to move off of a tier, if they are not making enough progress and they need more intensive supports, if they need less intensive supports, if they need to stay on their current level of support because it is effective, or if you need to stop the intervention altogether and find something completely new. That would usually occur if the behavior has, I use behavior because I'm the behavior specialist, but if a target behavior has increased instead of decreasing, that's when you would stop the intervention and find something new.
So when we talk about data-based decision-making with academics, that data is really going to impact your Tier 1 instruction for the majority of your students. And you want to monitor the entire school or program also for academics. Do you know how many students are making failing grades each week? Do you know who is on level, below level, or above grade level? Are you making those decisions about academic interventions based on this information? For an administrator, you definitely want to look at your entire program, but this is also beneficial as teachers working as a team for all students. And that data collected can also guide professional learning needs and opportunities moving forward.
For behavior, we typically talk about your data in terms of office discipline referrals because those are the most common ways of collecting data. But even if it is classroom data that you collect, you want to make sure that you're using all of that information to make decisions, not just for individual students, but also for your own instructional purposes and for your students as a whole. So some questions you may want to ask yourself are what behavior is showing up the most throughout all of your students? What time of day seems to be a trigger? Where is behavior occurring? And then any other patterns that you can observe, and that allows you to look at your instructional practice, your day, see if there's something that you can tweak to alter those patterns. We went through this very, very quickly, and it was honestly just a very, very brief overview. If you would like additional information, all of our emails are on the screen. Jessica is the instructional specialist. I'm Kristen. I'm the behavior specialist. And then we also have a project coordinator and a director of our grant. Please reach out. Feel free to ask us any other questions you have. And then I promised we would tell you what our website was. We have a Facebook. It's not used very frequently, but we do update our website, and we update interventions available on there, upcoming professional development. It's www.otis.net. So please feel free to look us up on there also.
Someone asked if we were going to print out this presentation, and we can definitely make that available to you.
We'll give it to Jennifer and have her figure it out.
All right, and so this presentation will be uploaded to the webinars page on the Alternative Education website, so you'll be able to re-watch this, get it. If they don't mind, I can email out the hard copy when I email out your professional development certificate once I get attendance from Gary. But just several things that I wanted to point out because as you can see, they are from the special education department, and we typically are not special ed, but that doesn't mean that the strategies don't apply. So as I rolled out, as Missy and I spoke with you guys in September, we had updated the high school rubric, and we had produced a new middle school rubric with the input and cooperation of the Alternative Ed Advisory Board. And so as they were talking in their presentation, you can kind of see that, yes, RTI and PBIS were specifically listed in our new rubrics, but we also increased parent contact by requiring that you guys give a climate culture survey to both your staff, your students, and your parents. We want this to help guide counseling and life skills as well as your instruction. We also are requiring that you guys now give an exit survey, because we want you guys constantly looking at where your status is, what changes, what improvements, but then even are our students feeling safe? We know that a lot of times our students aren't feeling safe in the traditional setting, which is why they want to come to the alternative ed setting. It's smaller, it's more it's more of a home for them. Professional development, we have really increased that this year. This year, in conjunction with the new Alt Ed Association, we have 10 regions, and each of those regions has a representative, a program director, right there in your area that we want you guys able to connect. That way you don't feel isolated and alone, that you can network and discuss things with. We host these monthly webinars. Next month's webinar is on climate and culture, which is, again, a requirement in your rubric. We have the virtual book study, 7 ways to transform the lives of wounded students, 7 strategies that you can implement with those students that are beyond at risk. They've already suffered a traumatic episode, and so they're already a wounded student. 7 ways that you can really impact and stabilize that child. We're host the fall regional meetings. On Friday, I'll be shipping out in the listserv links for a spring regional meeting. It will be a half-day regional meeting focusing on engagement and improving attendance, the 2 reasons why our kids come to us. So bring your strategies, bring your resources, because that will be full of lots of conversation and discussion about what works for you, how could it work for you, those kinds of things. Dr. Joe Hendershot, who is the author of 7 Ways to Transform the Lives of Wounded Students, will be with us on February 6th here at Metro Tech. That's limited to 250 people, and so I will be sending out that registration link on Friday. So be looking for that if you're interested in that. Coming up, the new association has scheduled to have a state alternative education conference in October. So be looking for more information. If you maybe want to even be a presenter at that conference. For 6 years, you have asked me for a state conference back, and the association has delivered. So as we talk about professional development, we did increase and really get specific that your professional development needed to be geared to you, that you weren't getting the PD that traditional needed, that you needed to be getting PD that would help benefit you and your students. They spoke about individual and effective instruction, which are our two of our 17 criteria. trying to think here what else stood out. We did put in that you need to be PLCing and staffing your students. They talked about that as being a strategy, as well as an increase in that student and parent contact as you guys are monitoring progress. And remember that monitoring progress is more than just the fact that you can pull up your online software instructional program and see how many lessons. It needs to go beyond just that one system. Another one of our 17 criteria is self-evaluation. And again, we're trying to help you be more intentional and in expanding our data tracking to include students, parents, as well as your staff. Do we have any questions so far?
Can I?
Yeah.
Sorry, this is Jessica. I'm jumping in. We also offer a summer institute that's open to all educators, and it'll be on our website as well. We definitely open that up to everyone. It's not just for special ed, it's for everyone. And we also are now we're having a kickoff next month, so if you are a superintendent or principal and you're interested in OTISS in your district, be looking for that. It was in the listserv this week.
Okay, so this video will be available as soon as Gary gets it to me. Usually he gets it to me the day after, and then Missy gets it uploaded in the few days after that. So definitely by next week, this video will be available to you guys. So again, this webinar will be archived. And then that's where you register for the webinars also coming up. February's webinar will be on the climate and culture, again, which is a new requirement in your rubric. She said, what website would the Summer Institute be listed?
Yeah. Our Summer Institute will be listed at www.otis.net.
Sorry, that last one.
I know. Wait. Oh.
Do you want me to just go to the last screen? Oh, there you go.
You can hit that one there and it'll open up all of them.
Sorry.
Oh, no, yep, you're totally fine. No, you're fine.
If you have access to the listserv, all of our OTISS activity, or anything that is open outside of our existing schools and districts, will be posted on the listserv.
Okay. Just also remember that on Friday, that link for registration will go out. He will be here face-to-face on February 6th from 8:30 to 3:30. I'm really super excited. I'm talking and planning with him last week. He'll give you several strategies, and then in your tables of 8, you'll be able to kind of hash out what that would look like in your programs. Lots of hands-on, lots of discussion throughout the day. We are doing the virtual book study on his book, 7 Ways to Transform the Lives of Wounded Students. We have 3 chapters left. Yesterday's chapter was on empathy and how you teach children to be more empathetic and what those strategies are to implement into your programming and even into your different subject areas. So if you're interested in that, again, the Alternative Education webpage has previous chapters archived and a way for you to register for the remaining chapters. And then on Friday, I will be sending out the registration link for the spring regional meeting so that we're going to go over different strategies that may help you engage students and improve your attendance. I do appreciate you guys coming. Any last questions? Comments? Okay, then, yeah, we'll even take concerns. Okay, thank you so much. You guys have a great day.